Hey, good morning, everyone. This morning we are looking at chapter 16 in the book of Acts, verses 11 to 40. And at this chapter, I thought it would be really good to just step back and get an overview of where we've come up to so far in the book of Acts. We're only about halfway through. But it's really important to remember the big picture. And so I've decided to do this sermon in the office with the chalkboard behind me just to give us an overview. In chapter 1 of the book of Acts, Jesus tells his disciples that you will go and bear witness. You will bear witness in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And the author, Luke, uses this as a sort of an outline for the whole book. Okay, so starting in chapter 1, we're going to start in Jerusalem. We're going to end at the ends of the earth, which in that context meant Rome. And so as the book unfolds, you can see this broken up pretty easily into four sections. In chapters 1 through 7, most of the action, if not all the action, is in and around the city of Jerusalem. And the temple. The temple plays a very important role in those early chapters where the church is born and it's beginning to form as a group. And it's important to remember that this is a Jewish messianic movement. It begins in Jerusalem. The whole country is just a little bit larger than the state of New Jersey. And so this is a movement that's starting in a pretty small area compared to the whole Roman Empire in the Mediterranean area. But it has small beginnings in Jerusalem and the temple. And there's a lot of stories about Jerusalem and the temple and the authorities there. And then it moves on from chapters 8 to 12. We see it begin to move out into Judea, the surrounding area around Jerusalem and Samaria. And we begin to get a hint that this is being fulfilled, that the message is going out and it's encountering cultures, it's encountering people, it's encountering authorities and other temples and all this sort of thing. And it's beginning to move out in chapters 8 to 12. In chapters 13 to 20, where we are now, we see that this message is going to go out and it's going to encounter Greek and Roman cities, in particular Roman cities. So a couple weeks ago we talked about the city of Lystra and Paul there and what happened there. And today we're going to look at Paul's first trip to the city of Philippi. But it has this encounter with Roman cities. And then in chapters 21 to 28, we're going to see that the gospel makes its way all the way to the heartbeat of the Roman Empire, which is the city of Rome. And so it's pretty interesting because we begin in the capital of Israel, the heartbeat of Israel, and we progress over to the heartbeat of the Roman Empire, which is the city of Rome. And that's a good progression, and it follows what Jesus said in chapter 1. You will bear witness in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And so Rome, the Roman cities, the Roman Empire would be considered the ends of the earth. And so that's really important to remember because today we're gonna look at Philippi, which is a distinctly Roman city. And as this message goes out, as the disciples go out and bear witness, when they go out and tell about the story of Jesus and they tell about the power of God, there's going to be conflict that happens. The Spirit of God cannot go out and bring order to a chaotic world without some conflict. And we see this happen on a person-to-person basis. We see it happen within the church. We see it happen with local cultures and authorities and religions and all that sort of thing. And so that happens today. Today is a really important, this passage is really important for this, going out to the ends of the earth in this progression. And that's why I wanted to just back up and look at the big picture for a change. And one of the things that we see is that God is powerful. God is going out. It's not that Paul is powerful. It's not that Peter is powerful or James or Stephen or all these other people, Philip that we've seen. It's that God is powerful and God's power is going to go out and it's going to confront the power systems of the world And that's going to shake out differently for different people. Some people will get on board with this message. Some people will yield to it and be obedient to it. And other people are going to push back. And this is a story where we see lots of that happening. So one of the central themes here is power, and we still deal with power. There's power all around us. I know that, during this time of pandemic, when things seem a little bit chaotic to me, part of the ways that I've responded to a lack of power with the routines that I'm used to and the people I'm used to seeing and all the routine being disrupted because of the pandemic, I find that I get a little bit grouchier at home. I get a little bit more snappy at home. I'm trying to be a little bit more controlling of the home environment. And all that is a response to a feeling of a lack of power and then sort of lashing out or acting out in a way that is not really yielding myself to God, but trying to take power for myself. And I've heard that over and over from many people that there's different ways of dealing with the sense of lack of power that we're experiencing these days because of the pandemic. But there might be a real blessing in there for us, to get a sense of our loss of power so that we can turn to God and, rediscover our true source of power. So discovering that true source of power is going to be the theme for this passage. And we are in Acts chapter 16, verse 11. And we start by saying, the author, the narrator starts by saying, we boarded a boat at Troas and sailed straight across to the island of Samothrace. And the next day we landed at Neapolis. From there we reached Philippi, this is important, a major city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. And we stayed there several days. So the fact that Philippi is a Roman colony is really important because a Roman colony means that all the rules and the protocols and the culture and the laws and all of that apply in Rome as the heartbeat of the Roman Empire, apply also in Philippi. So it's not like chapter 14 in Lystra, where we have the Roman Empire would sometimes allow cities to kind of run their own show. In Philippi, being in Philippi is like being in Rome in the sense of the culture and the rules and the regulations and the laws and the customs and the protocols and all that sort of thing. It's a Roman colony. So we're stepping up as this begins to progress to the ends bearing witness. We're seeing it one step closer to the city of Rome in that we come to Philippi, a Roman colony. It says that they stayed there several days. So as we move on in chapter 13, it says, on the Sabbath, we went a little way outside the city to a riverbank where we thought people would be meeting for prayer, and we sat down to speak with some women who had gathered there. Now, Paul usually goes to the synagogue when he first enters the city and shares this Jewish messianic movement about Jesus, this message about the good news of God. He usually starts in the synagogue. But Philippi did not have a big Jewish population, and you need 10 males to make a synagogue. And apparently they didn't find one, so they're going to this other place of prayer. This is a Jewish group. They're down by the water, and it's women. And so that's where they're going to go next. They're going to go to this Jewish prayer meeting, this women's prayer meeting that's meeting down by the river. One of the ladies there, verse 14, was Lydia, a merchant of expensive purple cloth who worshipped God. Now, she's not Jewish by birth, but she does worship the Jewish God. She appreciates and she partakes in Jewish religion. As she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart and she accepted what Paul was saying. Now, as we get to our theme of power, this is really important because it is God who opens her heart. It's not Paul. The power is not coming from Paul. It's not coming from his associates. It's not coming from how well he speaks or his arguments or whatever, or how he treats her. It comes from God. God is the one that opens her heart. And it says, I love this, the Lord opened her heart and she accepted what Paul was saying. She and her household were baptized. So this is a powerful woman because she's wealthy. She is the leader of the household. She runs a very expensive business. And she is the head of the household. And these households were big. I mean, it was a big extended thing. And I don't mean just a big family. I mean that all the servants, all the slaves, all the people that worked for you, that lived on the campus, so to speak, the estate, they were all part of your household. Household is a big, broad term. And when in that world, it was a much more communal approach to belief. So in our world, we hear a lot about if you accept Jesus as your personal savior, which is a very individualistic way to approach it. But in that world, if the head of the household becomes a Christian, they say, hey, we're all Christian. This whole household is going to be Christian. We're going to worship as Christians. And so Lydia makes that decision, and she makes the executive decision as head of the household that everyone is going to be a Christian who's living and worshiping under the same roof. Okay? And she and her household were baptized. She asked her guests, if you agree that I'm a true believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my home. And she urged us, and we agreed. And so Paul and his associates stay at her home. Now, this also is really interesting, and it shows what happens with God when we connect with God. It shows what happens with our sense of power. Lydia is a wealthy person, and to bring all these people under her roof, which is probably several people. It's not just two people. It's not just Paul and Silas. It's a number of people that are traveling with him, and to put them up, it's going to cost her money. And so what you see here is someone who's wealthy, someone who is important, someone who's running a business, someone who has a large household is able to, with open hands, practice that generosity. In other words, she understands that power comes from God and not from wealth, and she is able to open up her wealth and demonstrate hospitality and generosity to these people who are staying and pay for them, help to fund the movement and house them at her house. It's a very powerful picture of God's power and what happens in her heart. God, the Lord, opened up her heart, and this is what happens. She becomes more generous. She helps to fund the movement. So it goes on. We have some now interactions in the city of Philippi. We see one day as they were going down to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit that enabled her to tell the future. She earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved." This went on day after day, verse 18. And Paul got so exasperated that he turned and said to the demon within her, "I command you in the name of Jesus to come out of her," and it instantly left her. So this can be a bit confusing because it almost seems like this demon-possessed girl is going and saying things that Paul would be saying, that they are servants of the Most High God and giving message about being saved. And what we have to understand is that within the context of a Roman city is that there's many gods. And so what she's saying is that the God that Paul is talking about is among the Most High. It's like he's among the upper echelon of gods, the upper tier of gods. And when she talks about being saved, she's talking about kind of what we would call a health and wealth gospel, how to be delivered from poverty, how to become wealthy, how to become healthy. And so those things sometimes happen when we follow God. God opens up those doors, but that's not really the essential nature of the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus is king, he's resurrected, he's defeated death, and he is Lord over the world, and so we worship him alone. Whether we get wealthy and healthy in the process is not guaranteed, but that's the kind of message that she's saying, and so it's really distorting the message that Paul is sending out to the crowd. And so he casts this demon, and it says it instantly left her. And I love that phrase because in the very next sentence it says her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered. And what it reads actually, literally, is the same as the demon. So let me read it a different way. The demon instantly left her. Her master's hopes of wealth left them. Okay? That's the way it kind of, there's a wordplay in there. And so they grabbed Paul and Silas and they dragged them before the authorities in the marketplace. Okay, so now they're upset because they've lost financial power, and they're going to bring Paul and Silas over to the authorities. And the authorities have political power and powers of justice and legal power and all that sort of thing. So we have this theme of power showing up all over the place. He dragged them before the authorities in the marketplace. The whole city was in an uproar because of these Jews. So this is what they're saying. They're not saying they dispossessed us of money. They're not saying that they ruined our business. They're saying the whole city is in an uproar because of these Jews. He points out an ethnic and cultural difference. They shouted to the city officials, they are teaching customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. So this is really vicious because it doesn't have to do with economics. It doesn't have to do with money. It doesn't have to do with business. They're really, the charge against them is more vicious than that. It involves fear and suspicion of foreigners and foreign culture. And I bring that up because we see that everywhere. We're seeing it with racial tensions in America. We're seeing it with, the us versus them in the political parties in an election year, us versus them and our views of mass and pandemic. There's this, they're vilifying Paul and Silas in their work based on the fact that they're Jewish, not on the fact that they lost any money by them casting out this demon. So that's really, it's a low blow, so to speak. But that's how you get power, right? You get a mob, you get a riot going, you get the people all wound up. That's power. That's power. Social power. A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas. The city officials ordered them to be stripped and beaten and wooden. So we have power again, lived out, physical, beat them up. They were severely beaten and they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape. So the jailer put them in the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in stocks. And so there's an emphasis here that they're not just in prison. They're in the deepest, darkest hole in that prison. And not only that, but their feet are shackled together. This is a demonstration of power. The power of the state, the power of the nation, the power of Rome. Okay? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Now we're at a jailer scene, and we know what that means, where there's going to be some sort of miraculous deliverance, right? That's how God works. That's how God shows his power. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. And other prisoners were listening. There's an understanding of power. Paul and Jesus are in prison. They're locked up, but they don't see that. They turn to God. They understand where true power lies. They turn to God. They're singing hymns. They're praying. They're doing all these things. They're ministering to the other prisoners. They understand where their true power lies. And it's not in being necessarily freedom. And the other prisoners were listening. Verse 26, suddenly there was a massive earthquake. The prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors flew open. The chains fell off every prisoner, not just them, but every prisoner. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped. So he sees all the doors open. He thinks that they've gotten out. So he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, "Stop. Don't kill yourself. We're all here." And so there you see where the jailer sees his source of power. His source of power is in his honor and his career. And if he doesn't have those, he's going to take his own life. Right? You see this theme shows up everywhere. It's incredible. But they're there. They didn't walk out. They're just sitting there. The jailer called for the lights, ran to the dungeon, fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Now we read this and we think he's talking about salvation and the gospel message. I don't think that's what he's talking about. There's been an earthquake, and he's afraid for his job. So I think his question about being saved has something to do with that. He either thinks that the gods are really angry and he's scared about the earthquake, and maybe he'll get crushed, or he's worried about losing his job. And he's saying, what can I do to be delivered out of this? But Paul has a double meaning. He's going to take that word and he's going to use it in a different way, right? He's going to point him to true power. They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household." And they shared the word of the Lord with him and all who lived in his household. Even at the hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he had everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them to his house. He set a meal before them, and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. So now he becomes a believer as well, just like Lydia, and all happens in the context of a home, which is community and love and grace and forgiveness and support and all those sort of things, what homes should symbolize. And I love that picture. And then finally we wrap up this chapter with the next morning, the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, "Let those men go." So the jailer told Paul, "The city officials have said that you and Silas are free to go. Go ahead, leave. You're off. You're free. Go ahead." And you're thinking, this is great. God showed up in an earthquake. They got freed. They can just go. And Paul replied, they have publicly beaten us without a trial and put us in prison, and we are Roman citizens. So now they want us to leave secretly? Certainly not. Let them come themselves to release us. In other words, Paul doesn't want the city to think that they escaped. He wants them to see where the power truly is. That the reason this happened was because of God, not because we snuck out. We didn't escape because of our own cunning, or slipping out the back, because of situation, because of circumstances. It's about the power of God. And he's going to make the magistrates, the people in power at the city, recognize where that power comes from. Now, he claims to be a citizen, and that's really important because the magistrates of a local city like Philippi could not imprison and beat Roman citizens without a trial. And they didn't have a trial. They just threw them in jail. And so now the magistrates are afraid of the power of Rome, and they don't want to be kicked out of their power, their position of power. Paul is making a power move on them. I mean, it's just going all the way around in this passage. When the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So they came to the jail and apologized to them, and they brought them out and begged them to leave the city. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned to the home of Lydia, where they met with the believers and encouraged them once more. Then they left town. So there's a lot of issue of power going on, right? And the purpose of the earthquake is to assert God's power, and Paul wants everyone to see that. He doesn't want to just slip out secretly and we'll just call it all good. He wants people to understand what is the true source of power that's going on. So this is interesting because the gospel triumphs, right? The gospel wins in the Jewish meeting place. It wins in the midst of the Roman colony. It triumphs in the midst of a Roman stronghold, the prison. It triumphs over political powers. It triumphs over supernatural powers. It triumphs in women's homes. It triumphs in men's homes. It triumphs over the wealthy's money, and it triumphs over slaves. Slave owners earning money because of their slaves. I mean, it shows its power in just about every way it can, even subtle ways in this passage. It is all over the place. Now, we have our sources of power. Money, you get paid. You get that stimulus check. You get that refund. You get that job raise. You get that bonus. You get that money in your hand. That is power. It has power to help, has power to hurt, has power to, give you a sense of security, all this sort of thing. Health, we get that notice from the doctor that it's negative, you're good to go, you're healthy. There's a sense of power. Mental wellness, when we're finally able, after a year of therapy or counseling, and we're able to move forward and engage the world in a way that's much more, just much more healthy. There's a sense of empowering. Majority, we talk about white privilege, being the majority race. There's power in that. Political power. We're fighting for political power. Both parties are fighting right now over who's going to win that most important seat as President of the United States. Industrial power, educational power, moving forward, we're worried about the schools and what our kids are going to get and not they're going to get. We want to make sure we get the best because education is power. National power, career and esteem, like this jailer, moving up the corporate ladder, being seen as someone who has it all, worked out, has a secure future. All these things are power. I'm not going to say they're not power. They are powerful. But one thing that we forget so often, particularly in times of trial, transition, like we're going through now with the pandemic, is that we forget where the true source of power comes. That all these things listed are tools. Education is a tool. Money is a tool. Health is something that's temporary. Even privilege in this nation is something that can be used for good in creating equality and just systems in our world. Using our majority voice to um, uh, for the cause of those who are on the outskirts, for the marginalized, and for the poor, and for the downtrodden. That's what that power should be, and all that comes to be is, I think sometimes what we forget is that we put our eggs in this basket of this power of finances or wellness or political power or whatever, and that won't get us moving that message to the ends of the world. The only power that can do that in a good way is the power of God. And so my encouragement at this point is, with this passage, is to remember that God's power is on top. And it's so easy to forget. I forget it all the time. And I know you all forget it all the time. That we can miss the boat on that. And we can end up spinning our wheels, chasing down all this power as if money is the goal. And intellectually, I think we know this as Christians, because we've read enough passages. We know that that's not true, that God is ultimately powerful. But our actions are the ones that are going to tell the story. Paul, in his first place, he goes to a place of prayer. He goes to a place of prayer as his first stop in this city. That tells us what he understands, where true power is found. He knows where the starting place is, and that is God. And then all those other sources of power flow out of that. That money is not the goal, it's a tool. That privilege is a platform that we can use to help other people, to better other people's life. That wellness is something that God gives. It's a blessing, it's a gift, and we thank God for that. But we don't pursue it as an end in itself, because all of those will not stand. Just as God's Spirit moves through this city and overturns all the power tables in this city in many different ways, we need to pursue that power first and that relationship first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all this will be added to you. Paul seems to be doing a power shift here by claiming his rights as a citizen. And one question I have is, why all this chest thumping that we see from Paul? And I think Paul sees that this whole thing is about a contest of power, not between Paul and the magistrates, but between God and Rome. Between God and Rome. I want to leave you with this quote. Belief in Jesus implies much more than assent. It's a radical change, not only in the manner in which we live, but also in the values by which we measure success or power in life. Where are you seeking power? Be honest with yourself. I've been honest with myself. I seek power and trying to control things at home when I feel out of control with this pandemic. I really need to go to my knees, go to prayer, go to confession, spend time with God. And where do you see power showing up? God showing up in little ways around your life, just like it showed up all throughout the story in little tiny ways. Where is God showing up in powerful ways during this pandemic, during this time of separation, during this time of turmoil with race and politics? Where do you see that? How can you get on board with that? Those are the questions I want to leave you with. We will see you next week. God bless.